Funding for the Writing Code has been provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Great ideas brought to life. The National Science Foundation, where discoveries begin. The Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, dedicated to strengthening America's future through education. And the Carl and Lily Pforzheimer Foundation.
Writing is a relative newcomer. It was invented, as far as we can tell, in a small number of places on Earth.
The idea of putting down a story, I'm so glad someone thought of it, whenever it was, because it's a marvelous way to make a living, I'll tell you.
Writing is a code. It's the making of marks that you then have to understand that these marks can be retranslated into speech. So written words are to speech as black and white musical notes on a page are to music.
What's so great about writing? Well, for one thing, it allows you to communicate with people that you're not sitting in the same room with at the time. You can communicate with people who are thousands of miles away. You can benefit from the thoughts of people who lived before you were born. Other people can benefit from the things that you say after you're dead. You can accumulate the wisdom of thousands of people that you'd never be able to meet in your own lifetime.
I think I got into crime because I was fascinated by criminals.
Hi, this is 1300 Beaubien, Detroit Police Headquarters. When I come here, and I've been coming for more than 25 years, whenever I come, I head right up to the 5th floor where homicide section has its offices. And I've always enjoyed working with the homicide guys because they all have a special kind of sense of humor that I like very much.
Decided I was a writer when I was 16. Now at that time, which was 1956 in Toronto, Canada, there were no role models, so I couldn't look at another writer and say, I want to be like that person. The writers I knew about were dead and in other countries. Two things to be overcome: dead in other countries.
I did not want to read books, but my mother made sure that I went to the library. She took me and she told me that I had to tell her what I read and explain it to her. So she took me to the library, and if I didn't explain it to her, she would whip me with the ironing card.
A writer is a writer because a writer writes.
Writing system is a system of written symbols. It corresponds to the words and the sounds of spoken language. And it's carved on stone, it's painted on a wall, it's written on paper, it's typed on a computer, any way that visual symbols can be represented.
This tablet is inscribed in cuneiform and is one of the Sumerian fragments of what we would call the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was a king who we would call mythical or semi-mythical, by which I mean that we don't really know if he lived. But the Sumerians certainly believed he did live. Gilgamesh is the hero of one of the world's first epic poems. We call it the Epic of Gilgamesh. And besides having great adventures, Gilgamesh poses some of the eternal questions. This tablet is in fact part of a composition which begins with Gilgamesh in the city of Uruk, and he goes up onto the walls of the city and sees bodies floating down the river. And he's moping around, he's depressed, and his friend Enkidu says to him, "Why are you so depressed?" And Gilgamesh says, "What's the point of it all?" Now, Enkidu's response is very practical. He says, "I know what we need to do to fix this. We need to go off to the mountains, kill a monster, and set up a stone record inscribed with our great exploits. We have to write about what we did, because the key to immortality is writing."
As soon as a material was developed that was able to knock something out of stone, it's been used to put marks into stone. The longevity of an inscription varies from climate to climate. Granite will withstand that sort of weathering much better than, say, for instance, marble. Letter carving has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. I started by doing a groove right down the middle. Once I've got a groove down the center, then I'm going to hold my chisel at an angle, and I begin to take off one side of that groove at a V-cut angle. The Romans perfected the V-cut letter, but they weren't the first to come up with it. I know there was Greek letter carving where the V-cut was also used. The carvings will last certainly longer than anything in wood or paper. That was a lot of the appeal to me. I liked the idea of this is going to last a long, long time.
This is a full-size replica of the Code of Hammurabi, which is a stone monument showing at the top the sun god Shamash, the god of justice, giving the symbols of royal power to the king Hammurabi. The very first law starts right here, and is a law against false witness. And the law reads, "If a man accuses another man of homicide and cannot substantiate the accusation, the accuser will be put to death." The importance of this written law code is more royal power and the statement that the king can make that his is the authority granted by the gods to issue justice than in the daily exercise of justice itself.
If you're making a will, it's much better to have it written down, because people will differ if they're just listening to you say, "Well, Bob gets the grand piano and I want Betty to have the candlesticks and Susan can have whatever is underneath the sink." People are going to differ in their memory of what was said. So when it's a legal document, it's much better to have it written down. It's also much better to have a lawyer who is the exact opposite of a creative writer. A lawyer will want each word to mean one thing and one thing only. A creative writer will want to get as many meanings out of a word as that writer can possibly get.
Many people wonder what came first, prose or poetry, and there's certainly a romantic part of ourselves that would like to believe that poetry came first, but I suspect prose did.
Originally, it was written down conversation. Some of the first prose pieces we know are like that, but of course there was a long, long literary tradition before there was written down poetry or written down prose. It was the oral tradition.
When Homer recited a poem, every time Homer recited that poem, he recited it in a completely different way. The words were never the same. It wasn't until some other Greek, hundreds of years later, wrote Homer down that the Iliad and the Odyssey became those permanent words that we know today.
For the Egyptians, writing was very important because by writing something down, it becomes eternal and true. So if you write it, it becomes real. The ancient Egyptians had a god of writing, and his name was Thoth. He's often pictured either as a baboon or more commonly as an ibis bird. And people think that Thoth was associated with writing and ibises because the ibis bird has a long, thin beak, which looks very much like a reed pen. And it also sort of looks down in a very learned kind of way. It's a bit like a secretary bird. So it was a particularly appropriate animal for the god Thoth. And it also spent a lot of time in papyrus marshes to sort of emphasize this unity with writing. For the ancient Egyptians, papyrus, mehit, was in a way a sacred plant, not only because it produced this amazing writing paper. There's also the idea that the first mound where creation happened came out of a papyrus thicket. So again, being surrounded by papyrus gives you an idea of a sacred cosmos and was very evocative for the ancient Egyptians. The scribe was probably the most important bureaucratic person in ancient Egypt, and in fact, in early Egyptian history, when very few people were literate, to be a scribe was a great honor, and it was only very high-level people who were scribes. Papyrus paper is made by stripping off the outside layers of this very tall green papyrus plant. Then these are cut in long, thin, vertical pieces. Once these have been cut, they're sometimes soaked so that they sort of get a nice wet feel to them. Then these are laid out. You have vertical strips and horizontal strips, and they're all laid very close together. After these strips have been laid out, they're put into a press of some sort. And the idea is that either some of the sucroses within the sap help hold it together, or maybe the cell structures bond off due to the weight of the press. Papyrus was used not only by the ancient Egyptians, but by the Greeks and the Romans, by the Copts and the Muslims, in fact. It was the basic source of paper, not just in Egypt, but for most of the world. But this ended in the 8th century AD, when the Chinese invented paper, and quite shortly thereafter, the use of papyrus died out.
You can make paper out of anything. Some people bring in blue jeans to create paper out of. These are some examples in terms of what happens after you cut up your blue jeans and it's placed into a Hollander beater. This is after 30 minutes. You have something that has kind of a more fabric look to it. This is after an hour and a half, and this has a little bit of weight put on. That means we've created a little bit more beating action in the beater, starting to get a little bit more paper-like. And then after another 90 minutes, we have something that most people would recognize as paper. The history of papermaking follows the history of Buddhism. So first we had paper in China, and then we had, soon after that, papermaking showing up in Japan and Korea. So I'm giving the paper in a little bit of a shake here to realign some of the fibers so that they intermingle, and that's going to give it more strength. We put it onto the felt, apply a little bit of pressure, and then bring it out. It wasn't until 750 AD when we had a conflict between Arabians and Chinese in Samarkand, where some Buddhist monks who knew how to make paper were taken captive. And then soon after that, paper making really exploded into what we would call the Middle East right now.
In the history of books, the only way to make a book 1,000 years ago in Europe would be for it to be written by hand. And the people who write the books were known as scribes. Now, a scribe typically was a monk, though not exclusively. The monk would first of all make his pen. They would take the feather of a bird, such as a goose or a crow, and turn it into a pen called the quill. Now the quill, the key to making the quill pen, they would scrape it and sharpen it up to a point. Then they cut a crack right down the center up to the tip. That crack actually forms something called the capillary. The capillary is going to draw the ink down the tube of the feather to the tip so that you can write a fine line. So the scribe would dip this in some liquid black ink, write a couple letters, dip it in ink, write a couple letters, dip it in ink. Something the size of a Bible could take a scribe easily 3 to 5 years to complete. At the end of 5 years, you of course have one book. The value of that book would be equal to a man's wages for that period of time. In our terms of money today, that could be anywhere from $50,000 up to $100,000 for one book. Very few people could afford books at this time. Then the whole world changed 550 years ago when a gentleman came on the scene in Germany by the name of Gutenberg, Johann or John Gutenberg. Gutenberg was born in around 1398 in Mainz, Germany, and Gutenberg figured out a way to write books faster. He invented a machine which we call the printing press. The key to Gutenberg's machine is his invention and development of the movable metal type. He figured out a process, he developed a process to cast accurately the letters of the alphabet in quantities that he could then use and assemble these letters together and put inside the printing press. Movable metal type. That's Gutenberg's genius. He could make all these letters for each letter of the alphabet, thousands of letters, throw them into a case, into the printer's case, take them out, assemble the letters together for a whole page of letters, print that page, put those letters away, and then take the letters out again and assemble another unique page. They would all fit precisely with each other. It is a modular system. in the year 1440, 1450. It used to be back when Gutenberg was a printer. He always kept his letters in two places. The small letters were kept down here closer to you. Then the capitals were kept in the second case up above them, what became known as uppercase letters and lowercase letters. Uppercase letters and lowercase letters, which is a printer's term. In 1400, with the development of oil painting, Gutenberg was able to borrow their recipe for a simple yet almost perfect printer's ink. Two basic ingredients in the ink: soot, found in your fireplace, and linseed oil. But Gutenberg simply mirroring the look of the handwritten page of his days. Everything about the first book he printed, the Gutenberg Bible, says this is a handwritten book. The design of the page, the design of the letters, the spacing, everything about it. His clientele are the people who buy handwritten books. Gutenberg saw this as a faster writing machine. We'll get our print sheet. Now, this is an exact copy of what Gutenberg was printing in 1450, one page out of the famous Gutenberg Bible. Now, Gutenberg, of course, only printed the black. The artwork was actually done by hand after you purchased one of the Bibles. It was your responsibility as the owner of the Bible to pay for the illustrations. Now, to show you the impact that Gutenberg's Bible had on the world, before Gutenberg, again, roughly 5 years for one scribe to complete a Bible. Gutenberg in 5 years, 3 to 5 years, he prints now 180 Bibles. Then in the 50 years after Gutenberg, from the year 1450 up to about the year 1500, close to 12 million books were produced all over Europe by the printers. That's compared to how many books were written by hand during Gutenberg's entire lifetime, a number that's close to about 20,000. So we went from having 20,000 books produced to having 12 million books. This begins to give an illustration as to why the printing press is considered the greatest invention of the last 1,000 years.
Poetry is special because we recognize that it's a very special kind of speech. It tends to be used in special occasions for a particular purpose of arousing an emotional reaction in people.
مژده وصل تو کو کز سر جان برخیزم طایر قدسم و از دام جهان برخیزم.
Waiting, straining to hear your voice, that I may rise. I am heaven's dove, that from the earthy cage will rise.
به ولای تو که گر بنده خویشم خوانی از سر خواجگی کون و مکان برخیزم. برسان باران.
If I am bid but to be your slave, I gladly shall forswear dominion over worldly things, as now I rise.
بر سر تربت من با می و مطرب بنشین.
Bring me a minstrel to my grave and a bottle of good wine. Your fragrant presence shall lift me dancing, full of joy, as I rise. Hold high your lordly stature that I may see. You draw me nigh. With clapping hands I leave this life and I rise. On the day that I die, a glimpse of you may I behold, and as Hafez, from life's desire, leap into eternity, and I will rise.
Art does not speak to your brain first. Art speaks to your heart first, and then it goes to your brain.
When you're writing poetry or composing poetry, rhythm comes before meaning because of the nature of poetry.
My poetry is affected by the city, by the sounds of cars and trucks. Yeah, like that horn we just heard now. That horn we just heard now is like a wonderful thing, just to hear the rhythm of it. The rhythm of it is like a beat. It's like a beat in a line of poetry. Syncopated. When I hear car horns, you go, instead of di-da, 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 which is an iambic line, I hear reading glasses in place, serious as cancer. The way her eyes devoured everything. Finished old newspapers stacked up high as her waistline when she stood, proud, erect, defiant, all of 5 feet 2 inches tall in high-heeled shoes. Petite, she was a pistol when she was young. Ted Jones once said, the only thing that people have to fear from the poet is the truth. And I would hope that is what it would be with me, that when you see me, you know that I'm going to tell you the truth. She's still a pistol at 81, has most of her real teeth too, has outlived all her suitors except this last one, Biff, who she says is slowing down at 79. She still walks with a bounce in her stride, seems to still float across and through the air, her eyes blazing, bore in on you still like bullets whenever she squeezes the trigger of her hot temper. And I love her more than I could ever imagine. Love her far deeper than fear itself. Somebody told me one time, prose is wine, in a way. And poetry is cognac. Both of it comes from the grape. But poetry is condensed, stronger.
After a long period of poetic romances followed by a lot of playwriting, Don Quixote appears. He was contemporaneous with Shakespeare. So that gives you an idea of when the novel came to being in what we now think of as modern Europe. Of course, you could say that the Bible has a lot of mini novels in it. It has a lot of narratives packed into this one structure, which was originally not one structure at all. It was a collection of books. Here's the best, shortest first line in literature that I know of. It's the first sentence in Moby Dick. Call me Ishmael. How much can you get out of that? First of all, somebody is being addressed. It's an order or a suggestion. Second, his name isn't really Ishmael. If his name isn't Ishmael, why did he choose that name as the name he wants you to call him? In order to know the answer for that, you have to know the Bible. And then you have to read the whole rest of the book.
Who knows only his own generation remains always a child. Think about how those words sound. They didn't sound like ordinary person talking. They didn't sound like anybody you know talking. Who knows only his own generation remains always a child? There's a big difference between appropriate written style and appropriate spoken style. As written style, that sounds pretty old-fashioned. A spoken style, it's impossible.
Written language sounds different. The sentences are longer, the words are fancier, The constructions are more literary and arcane. When you speak, the words come out of your mouth and they are gone forever.
United States Postal Service delivers to 140 million addresses and delivery points every day.
Nationwide, we process about 202 billion pieces of mail a year.
Yeah, I wrote that. And I wrote this too. But I needed help writing this. It's in Japanese. The secret to sign writing is to make it as simple and clear as possible, but nobody's yet deciphered that secret. As a traffic engineer, we have the right to write signs and try to get the public to obey the laws. Every year I had a goal when I was traffic commissioner. I had to write 6 million tickets. If I didn't write 6 million tickets, I'd be kicked out. So I wrote the 6 million tickets. Many of them were written against signs that I understood very well, my traffic engineers understood very well, but the public couldn't quite get it. Somebody wrote the word stop, and then somebody copied him, and then somebody copied it in New Jersey, and ultimately across the country.
The Chinese fortune cookie was first served here in the Japanese tea gardens by a Japanese businessman by the name of Makoto Hagiwara.
No, there's no such thing in China, even in Hong Kong, Taiwan. Fortune cookie was originally invented in San Francisco only. No such thing in China. You go ask them, they look like you're a stranger.
That's one of the myths about fortune cookies, that they were started by the Chinese. Another one is that they're written by a bunch of old Chinese guys in a room somewhere. The truth is, I'm one of the people that writes fortune cookies. Get your mind set. Confidence will lead you on. I'm normally a novelist, and there's a big difference between my approach to fortunes and to novels, because I think when you're writing fortunes, you're supposed to be offering some kind of insight into the world, and with novels, I think it's more, for me anyway, a matter of searching
Yeah, this is the fortune, okay? Look at you know how to read? Okay.
This is great.
I have never found my fortune in a cookie, no.
So basically what we had was a call comes in the middle of the night down to the homicide desk, and apparently the fire department made this location here.
To gather the way people talk, you do have to listen. And I suppose I've been listening all my life, because I don't go out purposely and sit in some shabby saloon and listen to people talk. This is the way I automatically do it. I listen when you're going to tell me something.
You call the victim a complainant. That's
Correct.
the official.
Yeah, he doesn't do much more complaining, but that's his last final complaint. You know?
Yeah.
Back in the days when I occasionally taught writing, what we call creative writing, I used to give the students an exercise to do. Go and sit in a bus station or in a restaurant, any place where they could overhear people's conversations. And I wanted them to write down exactly what they were hearing. You get a number of verbal bursts with a lot of interjections, pauses, and repetitions.
Again, we didn't know the link between the association between the person living at the house and the persons in the basement until we discovered that there was the victims in the basement.
The difference between, say, real dialogue, one that's, say, tape recorded, and mine is that mine keeps moving. It doesn't stumble along the way a tape recording does. It moves because it has a purpose. The purpose is to impart some information, is to move the story along. Once I get the character's sound, then the character tells me how he or she wants to talk. I do all my creating in longhand with a pen. And I use yellow pads, unlined, and I will write until I don't have anything more to say. And at that point, I will go to my typewriter.
Back in the 1860s, a man named Christopher Sholes invented what he called a typewriter. His daughter was the tester on it to make sure it would work. The only problem they came up with was that she always stacked up the keys, because you've got all these little keys that go up and down and so forth. This is what we mean by stacking up the keys. You see, then we had to pull the little suckers down. And they tried to figure out why this was, and he hired in a linguist, while being a rather clever man himself. And they discovered that they needed to rearrange the letters. They couldn't have them all in alphabetical order like he'd originally planned them. And so they separated things out like QU and ST and NG and things like that made people hit them right close together. And they came up with what is today referred to as the QWERTY keyboard. QWERTY. And we still use it exactly like that today. It's become an actual word.
The typewriter has greatly influenced the business, commercial, and economic progress of the nation. Today, typewriters enable women and girls to perform military and industrial services as important as those performed by men.
Basically, in the Western languages, we've got 26 letters or so, and 10 numbers, except they didn't need a number 1 because you always used L for the number 1. For all intents and purposes, everything could fit on the keyboard, except for the Chinese keyboard. They have a typewriter, but it's got multiple interchangeable keyboards.
On this tray, we have around 2,000, letters there. But on the other four extra tray, we have those letters, those words we didn't use very often.
How anybody would learn how or even go to the mental trouble of trying to learn how to use one is beyond me, but apparently they do.
Mr. Aronson, that objection is overruled. The jury will be instructed at the end of the case that to the extent the hypothetical does not comport with the evidence in the trial, they may disregard the entire question and the answer. So save your questions for cross-examination.
Ward Stone Island, an American genius, invented the stenotype machine. The beauty of this machine is that you can write as fast as someone can talk. Unlike the typewriter, which can only depress one key at a time, the stenotype machine is a fully depressible keyboard, like the piano, can press several keys at a time. This revolutionized court reporting. Nobody before Mr. Ireland had ever come up with the idea of typing words and syllables in one stroke. So if I hear the word stop, I hear the sound ST. I hear the P at the end, P or the P, and the O. So I would have STOP. But this is not a typewriter. This is a shorthand machine. So I could write stop that quickly in one stroke. And so every sound that we hear can be recorded in one stroke.
And he continued bleeding more and more. He literally bled to death.
This machine here is the linotype machine invented in 1886 by Ottmar Mergenthaler, a German immigrant to our country. He had actually solved the problem of how to mechanically set type for the newspapers to replace the method that Gutenberg had provided for us. Rather than work with pre-made letters that you would assemble together, he's going to have a machine cast the entire line for you when he needs it. The letter is actually painted on one side of the matrix. This happens to be a capital O. And then the letter is indented for casting on the other side. The matrices will slide down a chute, assemble where this ruler's at. We assemble our line, we're ready to move them over to the casting area. It brings the line up, moves it over to the casting area, squirts molten metal out, kicks the line out down here. Elevator comes down, picks up all the matrices, pushes them along the top. The ridges which are holding on to each matrix lets go of the pieces and then begin to fall back down to the correct channel. A good operator can be in the process of 3 lines at a time. Setting one line, casting one line, and having one line being distributed. One person can now do the work of 6 people previously. There was an explosion of books, printing, periodicals, encyclopedias, dictionaries. All this wealth of printed material because of one man's invention.
This newspaper has hired me and put me in charge of its copy desk because it wants to make use not only of my knowledge of English grammar and usage, but it wants to have the use of my taste and my judgment. I don't know how reporters do it. I don't have any enthusiasm for running around town all day trying to reach people who are unavailable or when they are reached, prove to be hostile or inarticulate. I don't envy them having to spend an entire day trying to assemble this material, sort through it, figure out what needs to go in the story, what doesn't, how to focus it, how to say it, is it clear? And then they turn it over to the copy desk, to the fault finders.
I've written my 10 rules for success and happiness. My first rule is never open a book with weather.
Edgar Allan Poe almost always started with the weather. I wouldn't begin an Elmore Leonard novel with the weather, but he always gets the weather in. You always know whether it's boiling hot or freezing cold. Usually it's boiling hot.
Never use an adverb to modify the verb said. He admonished gravely.
Mabel frowned. She was not amused. She said, "David, you're quite wrong about that." You then have a choice of whether to put an exclamation mark or a row of dots or a period.
Keep your exclamation points under control. You are allowed no more than 2 or 3 per 100,000 words. Never use the words suddenly or all hell broke loose. Don't go into great detail describing places and things, unless you're Margaret Atwood.
I know that. So cute. So cute.
Try to leave out the parts that readers tend to skip. That's rule number 10.
You cannot tell writers what to do. There are no rules that are going to be good for everyone. As soon as you make some rules for writing, another writer is going to come along who breaks all of those rules and produces a brilliant piece of work.
Good writing should be concrete. People, especially people like me, academics, have a strong temptation to try to flaunt our knowledge and our highfalutin vocabulary, but that actually makes language much more difficult to understand. Just to give an example, early in my career I was collaborating with another academic who was describing an experiment by saying that subjects were tested under good to excellent conditions of acoustic isolation. And I crossed it out and I put, subjects were tested in a quiet room.
Writing is definitely rewriting.
When I write a book, I'll put it through 6, 7, 8 drafts.
I want it to sound like it's spontaneous, so I rewrite my poems 16, 17 times.
For me, it's 6 minimum rewrites.
If it sounds like writing, I rewrite it.
Copy desk, McIntyre. Writers need editors. Writers, even good ones, do not have a complete perspective on their own work. So the writers write, we edit.
The biggest fights I have with my editors are over punctuation, because writers punctuate for the ear and editors punctuate according to some kind of house system. So they want consistency and writers want musicality.
I was part of the team that revised the Manual of Style. Structure, I feel very strongly, frees people to write and express themselves. When there are guidelines that everybody agrees on, it helps people spot errors and it helps people tell when things are missing.
Look here. Lieutenant Paul Piker, but our house style is that when a military title appears with a full name, it's abbreviated.
The waiter served dessert to David and I. No, the waiter served dessert to David and me.
Working class residents. It's a compound adjective, so what we need to do, we need to hyphenate working class.
This is what we refer to generally as the Gutenberg Bible. In this instance, I'd like to show you a mistake that occurred in handwriting after the text had been set. There's a blank left in this area by the printer, and the intention is to fill in a capital letter. Now, there was a guide letter put in. You can see it, it's a lowercase f. The rubricator mistakenly read that as a long S and wrote, therefore, this capital S. The word was to have been fuit, there was, but he wrote suet, which is gibberish.
There's a whole of elementary errors in grammar and usage that we see all the time. Basic lapses coming from professional journalists, some of them with years of tenure. The possessive its and the contraction its used interchangeably. Who and whom confused. Misplaced modifiers lingering stories. When I was in the 5th grade in public schools in eastern Kentucky, the example that they taught was, hanging in the closet, I found my coat. I learned it. Why didn't everybody else? We got complaints from readers, too, especially when some elementary lapse in grammar, a misspelling, a misstatement of fact appears in print. Those letters get routed to me. They often start, have any of your editors ever been to college? And I write back, and I try to explain. I don't dodge responsibility. Error is error, but I try to explain that an average daily edition of the Baltimore Sun constitutes a prose text roughly equivalent in length to the New Testament. We produce a document the size of the New Testament every 24 hours. And we try to do it without any mistakes. We have never done it. We will never do it. Neither will anybody else. But we do everything we can to reduce the number of those mistakes to the absolute minimum.
This is the campus of the University of Colorado at Boulder. I'm Bill Bright. This is my friend Robert Frost. He's writing a poem called Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. I've been very much involved myself with writing for a long time, with written language, and with editing. There are some editors in the world that I would consider bad editors, and they're the ones that go only by the rule book, that don't allow an author to say anything that the rule book doesn't account for. Now that, of course, is absolutely fatal for poetry. No great poet writes by the rule book. This poem by Robert Frost is a classic, and I wouldn't dream of trying to edit it.
Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow.
My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year.
He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake.
The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
It's amazing that most people alive today do not remember the time when offices were filled with typewriters, and there was the hum of the typed keys resonating in the background of all offices. No doubt about it, I'm a tech head. I love my computer, I love its speed, I love the fact that I can edit large quantities of text. But there's the occasion where the computer just doesn't do it for me, and I have to reach for one of my quill pens. When you use quill pens, of course you have to dip them in bottles of ink, and that limited how many words you could possibly write at any given moment. And I'm pretty sure that if you only had ink for 6 words at a time, 6 words at a pulse of ideas, it changes the rhythm, it changes the pace of ideas as they are presented on the page. I have found that when I prepare my speeches, where you want to not only convey information, you want to convey emotion, that if I write down the principal ideas of that speech with a quill pen, I find that the rhythm, the pace, the tone, the very soul of the speech comes out completely differently than could have ever happened if I just sat there banging on a keyboard of a computer. We might look at these in modern day and say, oh, how could you ever write with that? Well, Shakespeare wrote with one of these. And so by doing this, emotionally, I feel like I'm communing through time with those who lived and wrote and composed before there were ever typewriters or computers.
Funding for the Writing Code has been provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Science Foundation, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, dedicated to strengthening America's future through education, and the Carl and Lily Pforzheimer Foundation.